it out with y'all.
Welcome to Thinking Through Scripture. Good to see ya. If you're new here, welcome. Glad you found your way in. My name's Cal. Now, if you want the full backstory on who I am and what we're trying to build in this shop, there's a Watch This First video sitting right at the top of the playlist. The whole series is framed to roll out in order, one stone stacking right on top of the last one. But if you're like me and you don't much care for folks telling you how to drive, you just stay right here. We'll give you plenty to work with. Just keep in mind, if you do happen to get turned around in the woods, that playlist is always sitting over there to help you get your bearings. Let's get into it. Last time we established something worth sitting with for a minute. The universe didn't have to be here. Nothing would have been a perfectly coherent option. And yet, something is here, which means something being here instead of nothing demands an explanation. We also looked at the two answers most people reach for without really thinking it through. It's always been here. And it came from nothing. We said both of those answers just opt out of the question instead of actually engaging it. And we said the "it's always been here" answer has a problem we'd get back to. Today we get back to it, because it turns out the universe has a story, a beginning. And that beginning changes everything about how this conversation has to go. For most of human history, the default assumption was that the universe was eternal, always here, always will be. No beginning, no end. That was the safe, comfortable, academically respectable position for a long time. Mostly because it was real convenient. See, if the universe is eternal, you don't have to explain where it came from. You just get to skip the hardest question on the test. It sidesteps the whole problem. No beginning means no need for a beginner. Then science got in the way. Not theology, not philosophy. Science, and it didn't do it gently. In 1929, an astronomer named Edwin Hubble made an observation that nobody was quite prepared for. The galaxies are moving away from each other. Everything in the universe is spreading out, expanding in every direction at once. Now, if you're paying attention, that observation points somewhere uncomfortable. If everything is spreading out now, and you run the film backwards, everything was closer together before, and closer before that, and closer before that, until you get back to a point where everything that exists, all the matter, all the energy, all of space itself, was compressed into a single point, a singularity, smaller than anything you can meaningfully picture. And before that singularity, nothing. This is what we call the Big Bang. And I want to be clear about what that term actually means, because a lot of people picture it as an explosion, like a bomb going off in empty space. That's not what it is. There wasn't some big, dark, empty room waiting for the lights to come on. The room itself was born in that flash. Space itself came into existence at that moment. Time, too. Before that, you don't just have an absence of matter. You have an absence of where and when. Matter, energy, the laws of physics, all of it had a beginning. And that is a genuinely significant thing to sit with. Now I want to be honest about something before we go further. The Big Bang is not a Christian invention. It wasn't cooked up by theologians looking for evidence of God. In fact, when the theory was first proposed, a lot of scientists were deeply uncomfortable with it, because it pointed somewhere they didn't necessarily want to go. The astronomer Fred Hoyle, who didn't have much use for religion, actually coined the term Big Bang just to mock the whole idea. He thought it sounded ridiculous. I'll bet he's rolling over in his grave knowing that his little sarcastic jab became the official name on the birth certificate. He spent years trying to find a way around it. The evidence wouldn't cooperate. Eventually, even the holdouts had to concede. The universe had a beginning. There's a scientist named Robert Jastrow who founded NASA's Goddard Institute. Not a religious man, but an honest one. He wrote something worth quoting here. He said that for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. That's a scientist saying that honestly, worth paying attention to. But the expansion of the universe isn't the only line of evidence pointing to a beginning. There's another one that comes from a completely different direction. Thermodynamics, specifically the second law of thermodynamics, which sounds intimidating, but the basic idea is actually pretty straightforward. Everything runs down. A cup of hot coffee left on the counter gets cold. It doesn't get hotter. A barn left out in the weather without maintenance doesn't suddenly straighten its own timbers and grow a new tin roof. It rots. Left alone, everything falls apart and goes to hell eventually. Energy in a closed system always moves toward disorder, always spreads out. It never runs the other direction on its own. Now, a fellow might say, hold on, things organize themselves all the time. A seed turns into a tree. A messy room gets cleaned up. Sure it does. Because there's outside energy pouring in. The tree has the sun. The room has you. But zoom out to the whole show. The universe as a whole. It doesn't have an outside sun feeding it. It's the ultimate closed system. And it's spending its inheritance. Stars are burning out. Energy is spreading out and dissipating. The whole thing is winding down like a clock. Jastrow described it exactly that way. The universe is running down like a clock that was wound up at a specific moment in the past. Here's the question that creates. If the universe has been running down forever, if it's been winding down for an infinite amount of time, wouldn't it would already be wound down? The fact that it isn't, the fact that stars are still burning and energy is still moving, means it hasn't been running forever. It was wound up at some point. It had a beginning. So we have two completely independent lines of evidence, expansion of the universe and thermodynamics, both pointing at the same conclusion. The universe is not eternal. It had a start. Now here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Because once you establish that the universe had a beginning, a whole set of questions follow immediately. What caused it? What was there before it? And can the universe explain its own beginning? That last question is the one I want to spend some time on. Because there's a move that gets made in these conversations that sounds sophisticated, but doesn't actually hold up, and we need to deal with it directly. In 2010, Stephen Hawking published a book called The Grand Design. Hawking was one of the most brilliant physicists who ever lived. That's not up for debate. But in that book, he made a claim that a lot of folks just accepted without really examining. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing. That sounds impressive. Hawking said it, so people just nodded along. It involves physics, so it sounds like gospel. But when you actually run it through our toolkit, you'll find out pretty quickly that it's really just brilliant nonsense. It's a shell game wrapped up in high-level math. And a fella named John Lennox, a philosopher over at Oxford who looked at Hawking's claim, just kind of shook his head and dismantled it with nothing but plain language and common sense. He said something like this: if I told you that the laws of arithmetic created the bank account, you'd look at me sideways. The laws of arithmetic can tell you what happens when money goes in and money goes out, but they can't put the money there in the first place. Laws describe what matter does. They don't create matter. The law of gravity describes how masses attract each other, but it has no power to do anything at all unless there's already matter there to act on. You can't use gravity to explain the origin of the universe because gravity is part of the universe. It came into existence at the same moment everything else did. You can't use something that began to exist to explain why anything began to exist. That's circular reasoning. We covered that in episode 2. The conclusion is hiding inside the argument. Hawking also made a related claim that you'll hear in various forms. He said the universe came from nothing. But when you dig into what he and others mean by nothing in these contexts, something interesting comes up. They don't actually mean nothing. They mean a quantum vacuum, a sea of fluctuating energy with particular properties and laws governing its behavior. That's not nothing. That's something. Something quite specific, actually. Calling a field of fluctuating quantum energy nothing isn't a scientific discovery. It's a linguistic shell game. Philosophers call that equivocation, just a $10 word that means using one word to mean two different things depending on which meaning best suits your argument. If you bought my lunch because I tell you I forgot my wallet and have nothing in my pocket, and then 10 minutes later I pull out a $20 bill and say, well, it's virtually nothing compared to the national debt, you're going to feel like I pulled a fast one on you. This concept matters here because the whole force of the claim depends on the word nothing meaning what it actually means. No properties, no energy, no laws, no potential. The absence of everything. The moment you smuggle even a quantum vacuum into the equation, you're not starting from nothing anymore. You're starting from something and just calling it nothing. Which brings us right back to the original question, where did that something come from? So let's lay out where we actually are. The universe had a beginning. The evidence for that is substantial and comes from multiple independent directions. The universe cannot explain its own beginning. Its own laws were part of what began. They can't reach back behind their own starting point. And the something from nothing answer, when examined carefully, either smuggles in a something it calls nothing, or runs into the same wall every other materialist explanation runs into. Something had to start the chain. Remember the logging chain from last episode? Every link contingent on the one above it, the whole thing has to be anchored to something that isn't itself dangling. Well, now we can say something more specific about what that anchor has to be like. Because if the universe, including space, time, matter, and energy, all came into existence at the beginning, then whatever caused it has to be outside all of those things. Outside space, outside time, outside matter, outside the physical laws that govern everything we can observe. Whatever is at the start of the chain is not the kind of thing we can put in a laboratory. Let's slow down and be real careful here, because this is the part of the conversation where folks tend to make a jump they haven't earned quite yet. They get to, something outside space and time caused the universe to begin, and they immediately say, see, that's God. And I understand the impulse. But that's moving faster than the evidence actually takes us at this point. All we have established so far is that whatever caused the universe has to be uncaused itself, outside space and time, enormously powerful, and non-physical. That's a significant set of attributes. It rules out a lot of options. But we haven't gotten to the full picture yet. There's one more thing worth pointing out here, and it's a detail that tends to get overlooked but is actually pretty important. Whatever caused the universe had to make a choice. I know, big claim, but hear me out for a second here. If the cause of the universe is eternal, existing outside time, then it has always existed. But the universe hasn't always existed. It began at a specific point, which means the cause, though eternal, produced an effect at a particular moment. An impersonal force, a law, a mechanism doesn't do that. An impersonal force that has always existed would have always produced its effect. If gravity has always existed, things have always been falling. If the cause of the universe is a mindless eternal force, the universe would be eternal too. But it isn't, which means whatever caused it didn't just produce the universe automatically. It decided to. That's not a small thing. A cause that makes decisions is a very different kind of thing than a cause that just operates mechanically. It points somewhere. Before we state the argument formally, I want to take a minute on something else that I think gets overlooked in these conversations. We've been talking about what the evidence tells us about the cause of the universe, but there's another question worth asking. Is the universe itself trying to tell us something? Not in a mystical way, in a plain, observable way. There's a concept theologians call natural revelation, the idea that creation itself communicates something about its maker. Not everything, not the specific details, but something. Paul put it this way in his letter to the Romans. He said that since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. That's a significant claim. Paul is saying the universe isn't neutral. It's communicating. And he's saying that communication is clear enough that nobody can reasonably claim they had no signal at all. Let's be careful about what natural revelation does and doesn't give us. Looking at the universe and reasoning carefully from what we can observe can get you to something like what we've been building toward. An eternal, powerful, personal, non-physical cause. Something that looks a lot more like a mind than a mechanism. That's actually a significant amount of information. But it still doesn't quite get you all the way there. Natural revelation is like finding evidence at an accident scene. A careful investigator can look at the skid marks, the point of impact, the debris field, and piece together a lot about what happened. The direction of travel, the approximate speed, whether the driver had time to react. But there are things you can't know from the physical evidence alone. Who was driving, where they were going, why they were on that road that night. For that you need a witness. Somebody who was there. Somebody who can speak directly to what happened and why. And if natural revelation is the physical evidence from the accident scene, what theologians call special revelation is the witness testimony. Special revelation is the idea that the Maker has spoken directly into history rather than just leaving fingerprints on creation. Not creation speaking about its Maker in general terms, but the Maker speaking directly. Now think about why that matters. If the universe points toward a personal cause, a mind that decided to create rather than not, then the question of whether that mind has ever communicated anything directly isn't just a religious assumption, it's the next logical question. A personal cause is the kind of thing that could speak, an impersonal force isn't. So once the cosmological argument gets you to a personal cause, the door to special revelation opens. Whether anything walked through it is a separate question, and we're going to spend a lot of time on that claim later in this series. Whether it holds up, what the evidence looks like, whether it deserves the weight Christians put on it, and so on. But that's not today's question. Today's question is what the universe itself tells us when we read it carefully. And the answer, it turns out, is quite a bit. The universe had a beginning. It came from something outside itself, and that something left a kind of fingerprint on everything that exists. A fingerprint that looks less like the random output of a mindless process, and more like the work of something that knew what it was doing. Now let's back up and state the argument cleanly, because we've been building toward it and it's worth putting it plainly before we go further. Philosophers call this the cosmological argument, and there are a couple of ways to state it, but here's the version that tracks most directly with what we've been talking about. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. That's it. Claim, reasons the so. 3 lines. And I want to walk through each one carefully because the strength of an argument is only as good as its weakest part. The first line. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. This is the most intuitive of the 3. Things don't just pop into existence uncaused out of nowhere. That's not something we've ever observed. Not once. Every single thing we've ever encountered in the physical world has an explanation for why it's there. The calf in the pasture had parents. The storm came from a pressure system moving in from the northwest. The crack in the windshield came from a rock off the back of a gravel truck on Highway 87. Cause and effect is so fundamental to how we understand reality that we don't even think about it most of the time. It's just the way things work. Now somebody will sometimes push back here and say, what about quantum mechanics? Don't particles pop in and out of existence at the quantum level without a cause? It's a fair question and worth addressing directly. What actually happens at the quantum level is that particles appear to behave in ways we can't fully predict. They seem to pop in and out of a quantum vacuum, but a quantum vacuum, as we already established, is not nothing. It's a sea of fluctuating energy governed by physical laws. The unpredictability isn't the same thing as uncaused. We may not know what causes a particular particle to appear at a particular moment. That's not the same as nothing causing it. Our inability to measure something perfectly doesn't mean there's no cause. It means we can't see the cause clearly. There's a difference. The second line. The universe began to exist. We've already spent considerable time on this one. Hubble's observation of an expanding universe. The second law of thermodynamics. 2 independent lines of evidence pointing at the same conclusion. But I want to add one more angle here that I think is worth sitting with: the idea of an actually infinite past. Some people will say the universe might have existed for an infinite amount of time in the past, even if it's changing, that it just always was. But here's the problem with that. An actually infinite series of past events is impossible to complete. Think about it this way. To get to today, the universe would have had to pass through an infinite number of previous moments, but you can't get through an infinite series. That's what infinite means. It has no end, or in this case, no beginning. If there was no beginning, there was no first moment to start the chain from. And if there was no first moment, today never arrives. But today has arrived. You're watching this video, which means there was a beginning. The third line follows directly from the first two. Therefore, the universe has a cause. If everything that begins to exist has a cause and the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause. The logic is airtight. The only way to escape the conclusion is to attack one of the first two lines. Either argue that things can begin to exist without a cause, which nobody has ever demonstrated, or argue that the universe didn't begin to exist, which runs directly into the evidence we just walked through. Neither of those is an easy place to stand. Now I want to do something here that I think will help make all of this feel less abstract. Because we've been talking about the universe as if it's just a concept, a philosophical category. And it isn't. It's a place. A genuinely staggering place. And I think getting a feel for the actual scale of what we're talking about changes how the cosmological argument lands. Because when we say the universe had a cause, we're not talking about explaining some small thing. Start close to home. Our sun. You could fit about 1 million Earths inside it. That's your local star, the one that's just out there doing its thing every day. There are stars out there that make our sun look like a marble next to a watermelon. Some of them are so large you could fit 450 million of our suns inside them. 450 million suns, each one of which could hold 1 million Earths. Let that sit for a second. Now zoom out. Our sun is one star in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way contains somewhere between 300 and 400 billion stars. If you tried to count to 100 billion at a rate of 10,000 numbers per day, it would take you about 27,000 years. And that's just our galaxy. There are estimated to be somewhere around 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. 2 trillion. Each one containing hundreds of billions of stars, spread across a universe that is at minimum 46 billion light-years in radius. A light-year is the distance light travels in a year. Light moves at 186,000 miles per second, fast enough to circle the Earth 7 times in a single second. And it would still take at least 46 billion years for light to reach the edge of the universe in any direction. Some estimates put the full size of the universe at 250 times larger than that. All of it had a beginning. All of it came from that singularity. Every single bit of it requires a cause. So when someone tells you the whole damn show just sparked itself into existence out of absolute nothingness, with no driver and no purpose, you have every right to look them in the eye and tell them that math doesn't check out. And here's what I find genuinely remarkable about that. Whatever caused all of that has to be big enough to cause all of that. Remember the law of cause and effect. The cause has to be adequate for the effect. You don't get a barn from a damn toothpick. The scale of the cause has to match the scale of the effect. Whatever spoke 2 trillion galaxies into being has to have some serious horsepower to back it up. That's a different order of magnitude than anything else we talk about. Now let's think carefully about what else we can say about this cause. We've already established a few things. It has to be outside space, time, matter, and energy. It has to be uncaused itself. It has to be unimaginably powerful, and we said it has to be personal, capable of making a decision, because an impersonal eternal force would have produced an eternal effect. We've just sketched out a pretty specific profile of this cause that we haven't named just yet. If you've ever spent any time around a church, your brain is probably itching to use some old Sunday school vocabulary. Maybe some words starting with omni? Words that sound impressive but get tossed around all willy-nilly in church circles without most of us really understanding what we're saying when we use them. The trouble with those words is we've heard them so many times they've just become part of the church furniture. We don't look at them anymore. But they aren't just religious decorations, they're precision descriptions of the data we just uncovered, so let's name them plainly and make sure we know what we're actually talking about. The first one is omnipotent. Omni means all. Potent means power, all-powerful. Now that sounds like a Sunday school answer, but think about what we actually established. Whatever caused the universe had to be adequate to produce everything that exists. 2 trillion galaxies, every star, every particle, every ounce of energy in the observable universe. From nothing, there is no frame of reference for that kind of power. Nothing in our experience comes close to it. Omnipotent isn't an exaggeration, it's the only word that fits. The second one is omnipresent, all-present, existing everywhere. This one follows from what we said about space. Space is a property of this universe. Whatever caused the universe exists outside the confines of space, which means it isn't located somewhere in particular. It isn't over here and not over there. It isn't restrained by distance or dimension the way everything inside the universe is. Now, this doesn't mean it's smeared out like butter across the universe. It means something more fundamental than that. Something not subject to spatial limitation at all. That's what omnipresent is pointing at. Not that God is physically everywhere the way air fills a room, but that spatial location simply doesn't apply to Him the way it applies to everything else. The third one is omniscient, all-knowing. Now I want to be straight about something here. The cosmological argument doesn't get us all the way to omniscience on its own. It gets us to powerful, eternal, personal, and non-physical, but omniscience is going to require more work as we build the case further. I just figured it's worth introducing the word here because you're going to encounter it, and knowing what it actually means matters. Omniscient means having complete knowledge. Not just knowing a lot, not just being very well informed. Complete knowledge of everything that is, everything that was, and everything that will be. That's a claim worth examining carefully when we get to it. And we will, just not today. There's also immutable, which means unchanging. And this one actually does follow from what we've established. Change requires time. Something that changes moves from one state to another. Before and after. But we said the cause of the universe exists outside time, no before or after, no sequence of states. Whatever it is, it simply is. The same, always. That's what immutable means. And it matters practically because it means whatever this cause is like, it isn't going to shift on you. It isn't going to be in a different mood tomorrow. It isn't going to change its mind about its own nature. What it is, it is. And then there's eternal, which we've already talked about, but is worth naming directly. Eternal doesn't just mean living for a very long time. It means existing outside of time altogether. No beginning, no end, not even a middle. Time itself is something this cause exists outside of, which is genuinely hard for us to wrap our heads around. Because everything we experience is inside time, we live in sequence, moment to moment. We can't directly experience what it would mean to exist without that. But the logic points there regardless of whether we can picture it. Eternal, not old, not ancient, outside time entirely. As I said before, I think it matters to actually know what these words mean. Because when you hear them in a conversation, or a sermon, or a song, you have a choice. You can let them wash over you as background noise, familiar sounds that don't mean much because you've never stopped to ask what they're actually pointing at. Or you can know what they mean. Know that they're not just religious vocabulary, they're extraordinarily accurate descriptions of something, specific attributes of a cause that the evidence actually points toward. Words that were chosen because they were the most accurate ones available. Not decoration. Description. And when you know that, the conversation changes. Instead of nodding along at words you've heard 100 times, you're actually tracking what's being claimed. which means you can evaluate it, which is exactly what we're here to do. I want to address something directly before we move on, because I can already hear some of you chomping at the bit to get this out. If everything has a cause, what caused God? It's a fair question, and it sounds like it levels the playing field. If the universe needs a cause, why doesn't God? Some folks throw that out like it's checkmate. Game over. Gotcha. But honestly, it's just a lazy objection. It sounds clever on paper, but it completely blows past the very first line of the argument. Look at it again. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. We aren't talking about things that have always been there. We're talking about things that had a starting line. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Not everything that exists. Things that begin. The whole point is that the cause of the universe didn't begin to exist. It's that necessary thing we talked about last episode. The thing at the tippy top of the chain that holds every little thing else up. An eternal uncaused cause isn't special pleading. It's a logical requirement. The chain has to stop somewhere. Something has to exist by its own nature rather than being caused by something else. Asking what caused the uncaused cause is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question assumes something that simply isn't there. There's another angle worth taking a closer look at here. Maybe the universe caused itself. Maybe it popped into existence through some quantum process we just don't fully understand yet. Maybe science will eventually explain it without needing anything outside the universe. I want to be honest here. I can't tell you with certainty what future science will or won't discover. Nobody can. But I can tell you a couple of things about this viewpoint. First, we don't get to punt to future discoveries as if they've already happened. That's not how evidence works. We reason from what we actually have, not from what we hope someone will find someday. Second, the universe causing itself runs into a logical wall that no amount of science is going to move. For the universe to cause itself, it would have to exist before it existed in order to do the causing. That's not a gap in our knowledge. That's a contradiction. Something cannot be its own cause. It would have to exist and not exist at the same moment. That's not a mystery waiting to be solved. That's just incoherent. So what does all of this actually mean for you? Not philosophically, personally. Because I think this is where a lot of these conversations go wrong. They stay up in the abstract and never come down to the ground where people actually live. So let me try to bring it down. If the cosmological argument is right, if the universe had a personal cause, then you were not an accident. Not in the sense that your parents didn't plan you. In the deeper sense, the universe that produced you was itself the product of something personal, something that decided to create rather than not, something that brought into existence the conditions that would eventually lead to you standing here asking these questions. Now, the cosmological argument doesn't tell us whether that something cares about you specifically. It doesn't tell us whether it has a name, or whether it has communicated anything directly. Those questions are for later. But it does tell us something that matters. The universe isn't a closed system with no outside. It's not a box with nothing beyond it. There is something beyond it. Something that existed before it. Something that caused it. And that something has a mind. Think about what that means for the questions people actually wrestle with. Why am I here? Does my life mean anything? Is there anybody out there who knows my name? Those questions feel very different if the universe is a mindless accident. The cosmological argument doesn't answer all of them, but it changes the landscape they're asked in. It moves us from a universe where those questions have no possible answer to a universe where they just might. And I think that's worth sitting with. Not to rush to conclusions, not to grab the comfortable answer, just to let it land that the universe is not what the purely materialist account says it is. The evidence doesn't support that account. The universe had a beginning, that beginning had a cause, and that cause looks a whole lot more like a someone than a something. That's not a small thing. Where we're headed next is the fine-tuning argument, which takes everything we've established here and pushes it even further. It's not just that the universe exists. It's that the universe exists in a way that looks remarkably like it was set up on purpose. The conditions required for life to be possible at all are so precisely calibrated that the odds of them occurring by chance are, by some estimates, effectively zero. That's a conversation worth having carefully, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But today the cosmological argument has done its work. We followed the evidence where it led without deciding in advance where we wanted it to go. And it led somewhere worth paying attention to. That's probably enough universe for one day. Thanks for stopping by. Before I let you get back to your day, I just wanted to say, thank you. It really means a lot to me that you'd take the time to sit here and listen to my yappin'. Time is the only thing they're not making any more of. So thank you for spending a little bit of yours with me. Do me a favor, would ya? Do the YouTube dance, hit the thumb, the subscribe button and the little bell. It'll really help us out. And leave me a comment. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like, what you want us to go over. Hell, tell me what you're having for dinner if you want. I want to get to know ya. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care.
I don't have all the answers, never claimed to know it all. Just an old farm kid still learning, working it out with y'all.